Welcome to Unit 4 of EDSE 512. Our focus for this unit will be the topic of response to intervention or multi-tiered system of support, and then progress monitoring. So we'll do an overview of that process, and that is related to data collection, oftentimes for IEP goals in particular, and that can be in behavior and social emotional wellness. It could be in self-determination, independent living skills, and of course in academics, very important. So there will be an IRIS module opportunity for you in this unit, and we do have a discussion board. So looking at the course schedule, the main responsibility for you this week will be the continued participation in the discussion board as you review the course content. And then this is our first opportunity for formal assignment submission. So you will have an assignment called Case Study Part 1 here, prior written notice and assessment plan. And we'll go over that in detail. As you can see upcoming, there is a case study Part 2. And then several critiques and another activity. And later in the course, not for many more weeks, but we will return to the case study with Part 3 and then Part 4. So this is a major part of our work for our course. We want to make sure that we get a strong start this unit, in Unit 4 with Part 1, because the foundation that we set for ourselves as we proceed will help us to be most successful in all parts of the case study assignment. So we will go over that assignment a little bit later in this video. First, response to intervention. This is probably something that you're familiar with, but we're looking at the universal interventions going to many students within the population. Everybody should have access to this. That might be restorative or mindful practices within the classroom on a regular basis, universal design for learning. These are just best practices. They're not put into place for any one student or a particular group of students, but they're what we provide to everyone to support student success, both academically and with social emotional well-being. And then the secondary interventions, this might be something like a check-in, check-out with a counselor. So it's something that not everybody is receiving, but students who are struggling and experiencing some issues or concerns at school. So that could be a small group, for example, for some targeted instruction. And then we're moving into the highest level of intervention, which is generally pretty small percentage of the student population. And this high level of intervention may include special education services or supports. Further evaluation may be included for a very targeted approach. And we'll be doing assessment obviously related to this for that high intensity support, behaviorally or in academics, and oftentimes in both, because as we know, there is a close relationship between the two. And back to this page, there is an IRIS module for you to browse. I strongly encourage you to complete this. It is for your own learning, so there's not a required submission related to the IRIS module, but they can be very helpful for your review. This is an activity that you can take a look at if response to intervention is not being implemented with fidelity in your setting. And so it is an overview just to help you to gather the main ideas. Honestly, it wouldn't hurt to do this one regardless of who you are. So the link is provided there as well. There is an article for you related to the special educator and response to intervention. So sometimes, if as a special education teacher, we might say, what do I do with response to intervention, or how can I play in and engage here? What's my role or my responsibility? So this article is roughly 20 pages long. So obviously you can just review it, and particularly you'll want to take a look at conclusions and results. Some of the data might be interesting to you. So this is just for your review as you're thinking about your role in the response to intervention process. So here is a website also called mtssforsuccess.org, and it does provide to you a variety of information regarding MTSS, how to do it and how to do it well. So there's a link here called implementation, and it does provide you with information on all the phases for MTSS. And that will be the planning, obviously, phase 2, the implementation, and then phase 3, we're sustaining what we're doing and working to expand it. There is information also on engaging stakeholders, because as we know, if we don't have engagement and buy-in from those in the school setting, we're not going to be successful in MTSS or RTI processes. Special topics, you might focus particularly on secondary schools or social emotional learning. This is a hot topic right now, SEL. I'm sure that you've been hearing a lot about it. In particular, there is citation here also of a website, CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. This is one of the main resources for general and more specific information addressing SEL, or social emotional learning, whole student approaches, with the concept in mind that without supporting SEL, students are not going to be anywhere near as successful in accessing and performing in academics. So SEL obviously is quite valuable for post-secondary living, for success in the workplace, interpersonal relationships, communication, conflict resolution, etc. So you'll want to think about what MTSS might have to do with SEL, and here we are with all the acronyms, but with that social emotional learning. So you'll see this visual here. We want to make our decisions based on data. Obviously, we want things to be culturally responsive for our MTSS processes, and take into consideration leadership, what kinds of professional capacities we might have, who do we have, and what kind of buy-in are we in need of. And then obviously, how are we screening and monitoring for progress to make sure that what we're doing is working? So this is a good visual to present the information if you do enjoy that kind of a thing. I know lots of us are visually supported in our learning. And then we do have a website link here and several below it related to screening and progress monitoring. So this will provide you with tool charts, and there are several that you can look through here. Totally just examples of things you can use to screen or progress monitor in a variety of areas, and you'll see that there are options for both academics and behaviors. Pretty cool to see that there are validity standards addressed here, and whether there's been an analysis for bias conducted. So you can then just check these out. They do go by grade level, and you can filter them as well. And then we have our Unit 4 discussion board. So this is a little bit complex, but I'll talk through it and we'll make sure we're all on the same page. For this discussion, you're going to be creating an essay question that could be used, for instance, on a quiz that is addressing this content. So first you'll find valuable information, obviously going through the IRIS modules, and then you will develop your question based upon something that you've learned from the IRIS modules. So you could be expanding further, asking for examples and applications, or presenting a potential problem scenario and requiring somebody to work through steps to solve that problem, or how it might be addressed with best practices and fidelity of implementation in mind as you're looking at RTI and MTSS. So you will develop that question. It should require your colleagues to access class materials, obviously, and to support their statements with evidence. You do want it to be a graduate level question, so really put some thought into it. Make sure you've got that depth of analysis, and then you're going to be responding in a single post. So this is your first reply post to at least 3 other people's questions. So you want to include their question in this post, and then you want to include your response, and that'll be for at least 3 questions. So if you're wondering about length requirement, just as long as you're analyzing with appropriate depth to really answer that question at the graduate level, that should be sufficient. Don't make it simple and easy and brief, because we're really looking to expand our learning here. So that'll be your first response post. And then for your third post, you will answer your own question. Oh, and also be sure to cite those sources in 7th edition APA format to avoid any plagiarism concern. And then for your post regarding your own question, you're going to give an answer the way that you would best answer your question. And you also have the opportunity to comment on some of the responses that other people gave to your question. Talk about any similarities or differences and your reflections on what they had to say. It's also valuable to respond to questions that have not been answered, because we all know it doesn't feel very pleasant if nobody answers your question. So keep that in mind. So for the discussion, you'll be creating responses to others, and then this is the case study part 1 assignment. So you can see that there is quite a bit that goes into this. I would encourage you to take the time sooner than later to review this description very clearly and carefully, and then also the rubric, obviously. But there are 2 case studies provided for you. One is named Misha, she's in middle school, and then Erasto is in elementary school. So you can review them. They are given to you down here, and they are PDF documents. You can pull them up and decide which one you would like to work on. Whichever of these 2 students you select will be with you for the rest of the semester in this course. So think about which one might be most relevant, or just which one you prefer. I do need to give a note to you regarding case studies. Obviously, it's imperfect. It's not a real student that you have access to. So as much as we try to be thorough in the case study, there's always going to be something that's lacking or something that you want to know more about. I will encourage you to fill in the blanks in these. It's okay to make up some information based on what you're given to support and supplement your statements. So you're not going to get in trouble for that, so to speak. You'll want to make this as whole child as possible in your approach, and so if you need to expand or fill in some blanks and connect some dots, please do that. Another thing is, I've heard students express frustration with case studies at times, saying I don't have enough information. And the reminder that I want to provide is, oftentimes, as you may have already encountered, this will be the case in the field as well. So you may receive a student who is able to or chooses to provide very little information regarding past educational circumstances or behavioral concerns, and you may not have the opportunity to speak with a guardian who has that information. So you may encounter students who have had a previous guardian who has passed away, and they're now, for instance, in a foster situation, and there's little information provided. You may encounter a student who spent a lot of time out of school, and there are not updated records, or a school, which unfortunately you may encounter a school that hasn't kept very solid records, and that's going to present you with a situation where you have very little information, and you need to do your best practices and pull together everything you can, draw any conclusions that you may need to do the best for the student, and to start with a strong foundation with the limited information that's provided to you. So even though it can feel frustrating, this is actually great preparation for situations that you may encounter in practice. So case study part 1 is prior written notice along with an assessment plan. Basically, there are 2 documents for you to fill out. So you will read the PDF of the case study that you choose very carefully. And there is a beautiful resource here, a valuable link regarding procedural guidance for the IEP. This will be your best friend throughout our course, so please reference it. It is lengthy, but that's why we've got this broken down. And right now you'll only be starting with these 2 documents. So first you'll begin with prior written notice, because the student in your case study is going to require special education evaluation. So you can get the form on the CDE IEP website, or you can just go down here and get the prior written notice and consent form. You'll be pulling that up and filling it out. Again, this is kind of a brief one. Some of the other forms are much longer later on in the case study. But as I said, you want to be as in-depth as possible. You don't want to just say NA to anything. Give as much information as you can. Take everything that you can glean from that case study document. Fill in the blanks as necessary. This needs to be really comprehensive for a parent to understand why we're conducting an evaluation and doing all this testing for their child. So that's the first thing you'll fill out. You'll see that there are some very important things for you to focus on here. The reason for the evaluation, the information that you have to support the proposal, other options considered, continuing with RTI or MTSS processes, continuing with Tier 1 or Tier 2 supports, etc. Those might be some things you might say. And then you'll be completing this second document, which is called the assessment plan. So you'll want to identify all the areas of concern that are shown to you in the case study PDF that you choose. And then you'll be filling out each part of this document in detail. So you'll want to identify at least 3 to 4 areas of concern. You'll list one in the row here. It could be academic, speech language. Those are just some examples, social, emotional, behavioral. And then you'll list sources for informal data and who will be responsible for this. So what kind of informal data will you be taking, and who will do it, and where will they do it? Okay, so don't just write special education teacher in every single one of these boxes. Think about which provider would be relevant to gather this informal data. And then we'll also be doing the formal assessments. So same thing, you'll list the need. Why do we need to do them? Which one will you use? For instance, the Wyatt, the Woodcock-Johnson, just some examples. And then who will do it and where and when. So please fill out this chart comprehensively and let me know if you've got questions.